Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. I'm a past member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee, and currently I'm a district activist leader and trustee for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to give us a place for the MS community to connect and to connect you with experts who are ready to answer your questions on the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. Please feel free to post your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. MS Navigators are online throughout today's program, answering those questions and connecting you to resources. Many people living with MS have questions about the safety of routine vaccinations. Over the past year, those questions have become more urgent and more specifically focused on COVID-19, shingles, and pneumonia vaccines. Today, we'll talk about vaccine-preventable infections and vaccine recommendations for people living with MS. Dr. Lisa Doggett joins us today. Dr. Doggett is the Senior Medical Director of HGS Access Point Health LLC and a family doctor based in Austin, Texas. She was a 2021-2022 Vaccine Science Fellow with the American Academy of Family Physicians, which was funded by a grant from Merck, Sharp, and Dome Corporation. Dr. Doggett has lived with MS since 2009, and she's written a memoir, blogs, and articles about her MS journey. Welcome, Dr. Doggett, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. This is such an important topic.
Agreed. Getting vaccinated to prevent harmful infection is a fundamental part of medical care for everyone, including people with MS. Experts from the American Academy of Neurology recommend that people with MS should receive vaccines according to standard vaccine guidelines. Dr. Doggett, what can you tell us about the safety of vaccines for people with MS? And perhaps you can also explain what those standard vaccine guidelines are all about.
Sure, absolutely. Things are always a little different for those of us who live with MS, but fortunately for vaccines, we know that vaccines are safe for the most part with people with MS. There are a few caveats that we can talk about, but really getting vaccinated is one of the most important things we can do for our health. In some cases, we do need to adjust the timing. And again, we can get into that a little bit more depending on what medications are being used to treat MS. For example, I take a disease-modifying therapy and had to work with my doctor about the timing for my COVID vaccines. And there are also a few vaccines that need to be avoided in people on certain MS therapies. The American Academy of Neurology has issued updated guidelines that go through in more detail the safety and the research for people who are living with MS. But what they recommend is that those of us who have MS get the standard vaccinations just like everybody else. Again, talking with the doctor is always important. Those standard vaccinations are recommended, and there's a guideline by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, and they're updated annually and available on the CDC website. But again, always talk with your doctor about vaccines, especially if you have any questions or unusual circumstances.
Well, I heard you mention that there were a couple of caveats related to which vaccines are most appropriate, and Emma heard that too. We just heard from her, and she's asking whether there are certain vaccines that she should always receive and whether there are vaccines she should never receive. So what are some of the things that people living with MS should consider when they're deciding which vaccines to get?
So as Emma suggests, she's right. There are different types of vaccines. Each type of vaccine is designed to teach your immune system how to fight off certain kinds of germs. So there are inactivated vaccines, which are used to kill the version of the germ that causes the disease. Examples of these include the flu shot, as well as a hepatitis A vaccine. Recombinant vaccines also use key pieces of a germ, like a protein, to trigger an immune response. So these include like hepatitis B, pneumococcal vaccine, and shingles vaccine. Also, the type of vaccine we've been hearing a lot about recently are the mRNA vaccines. These are the new Moderna and Pfizer COVID vaccines that teach our cells to make proteins in order to create that immune response. So for most people with MS, inactivated, recombinant, and mRNA vaccines are safe. They don't trigger an illness that they're meant to prevent. There is another type of vaccine, though, the live and live attenuated vaccines that are different. These use a weakened form of the germ that causes the disease. Examples in the US include the measles, mumps, and rubella MMR vaccine, varicella, and rotavirus. Fortunately, most of these vaccines were given to us as children, and they usually aren't repeated as adults, except in rare circumstances. There's also a live vaccine that's a flu vaccine, the intranasal form. These can create a strong and long-lasting immune response, but there's a small risk of causing the disease that they are trying to prevent, particularly if the person's immune system is weaker. So those live vaccines shouldn't usually be taken by people who are taking certain medications or who are immunocompromised. In MS, we can become immunocompromised from high-dose steroids that are used to treat relapses, as well as certain medications, disease-modifying therapies. There are some ways still to get those vaccines. Usually you would wait 4 to 6 weeks after a live vaccine to start an MS medication. Live vaccines usually aren't given during the course of treatment. They're usually avoided if the infection risk is low. But if there is a particular circumstance where someone's at higher risk for an infection, again, the doctor might talk to you about the risks and benefits. Based on the type of treatment, those live vaccines can be contraindicated for weeks or months after stopping the medication. This is a really special circumstance that where you would want to talk to your doctor. But again, those are rare. Those are the vast majority of vaccines that would be recommended for adults are not a cause of concern in somebody with MS.
Alex contacted us and he wants to know if any of these vaccines can trigger an MS relapse.
Gosh, that's certainly a concern for me. I know I've researched that repeatedly to make sure that I'm not putting myself at risk by getting a vaccine. And fortunately, we don't think at this point that vaccines are likely to cause a relapse. We still don't know 100% for sure. The studies are limited, but at this point, we do know that the risk of illness from most of the vaccine preventable infections is much greater than actually getting the vaccine. That is certainly the case for both COVID and for flu vaccination. There is some concern that medications like steroids that are used to treat a flare could make the vaccine less effective. So it's not usually so much a concern about a vaccine causing the relapse, but more of a concern that the vaccine might not be as effective due to treatment like steroids or, again, some disease-modifying therapies. Usually it is recommended if you're having a relapse to delay vaccine until after that relapse is no longer active, and that can be sometimes weeks later.
Well, I heard you say something that I want to circle back to. As you pointed out, there is evidence that certain MS medications may make some vaccines less effective. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So certain MS medications make the vaccines less effective. We think there's not, again, great studies even around this, but it's more of a theoretical concern, but certainly a valid concern. It really depends on the type of vaccine and the disease-modifying therapy or steroids that somebody may be taking. The response to vaccine can be blunted by these medications, particularly the S1P modulators, such as fingolimod, or B-cell therapies like ocrelizumab. MS doctors usually recommend that vaccination is completed before starting treatment with one of those medicines. But if it's not possible, vaccination with non-live vaccines, so those different kinds I talked about, usually are possible during the course of treatment. Again, I know I sound like a broken record, but you want to talk with your provider about the timing to make sure you get it right.
Well, it appears that COVID-19 is going to be part of our world, at least for the foreseeable future. So it's important for everyone to keep informed about the latest COVID-19 vaccine and boosters. So first, let me ask you the question that I always like to begin these conversations with. Are the COVID-19 vaccines safe for people with MS?
Yes, absolutely. The COVID vaccines are safe for people with MS and are strongly recommended for all of us who are living with MS. They are not live vaccines. They protect us against hospitalization and death, and serious side effects are rare.
Once again, I think you started answering my next question already, but it's worth circling back to because it's an important one. I wonder if you can talk about the safety of receiving a COVID-19 vaccination or a booster while you're on your MS medications, and whether there are any special considerations that people should keep in mind when it comes to the timing of that vaccination.
Yes, I appreciate just that the opportunity to circle back because it is important. So these medicines are absolutely, or these vaccines rather, are absolutely safe. The issue around timing is not a safety concern. It's just a matter of wanting to ensure that you get the best possible response from the vaccines to increase your chances of getting being truly immune to COVID in the future. Recent studies of people with MS who are on those B cell depleting therapies show that better antibody response when that timing is administered. So vaccines are administered about 3 months or more after the last dose. I think speaking with your doctors again, and important to make sure you've got the best opportunity to get the vaccine. If you're going to be in a high risk situation, like if you're traveling or something, you might want to check with your doctor to just ensure that the timing of your infusion is coordinated with your vaccine. The National MS Society also has a really excellent webpage that talks about the timing for all kinds of different medications. So I'd strongly recommend checking that out.
The new Omicron booster is now available at pharmacies and health centers, and the CDC is recommending that people ages 12 and older get this new booster. So, Dr. Doggett, how is this booster different than the last booster?
Yes, it's a good question. So, over the last 2 years, and unfortunately, the COVID virus has continued to mutate, which means that the earlier vaccines are not as effective against the newer strains of the virus. That's why we're seeing more breakthrough cases. Vaccine manufacturers, though, have been working to create new formulations of the vaccine, and that new Omicron-specific booster that we have available now, it just came out like 2 weeks ago, or even a little less than that. It targets 2 Omicron subvariants that are very common now, that are the vast majority of cases that we're seeing in the United States. The new booster also still protects us against the original virus as well.
So who's eligible to receive this new booster now, and who should be getting that booster as soon as possible?
Yes, certainly you mentioned people 12 and up should be getting this updated booster. Even if you've had 2 boosters in the past, you're still recommended to get this updated booster. And particularly it's important for people that are at high risk for getting a serious infection from COVID. So people who are immunocompromised due to medications or a medical condition, people that have other underlying conditions that put them at higher risk, such as diabetes, high blood pressure, being overweight, being older. There's a whole host of conditions that increase our chances of a serious infection from COVID. And so those folks for sure need to make it a priority.
Rajesh told us that he recently had COVID-19, so he's wondering if he should wait to get that booster. What's your recommendation for Rajesh and others in his situation?
That's a great question. Certainly something personal to me. I unfortunately also recently had COVID, so I am waiting a little bit to get my booster. The CDC recommends that people who are vaccinated and recently caught COVID wait 3 months to get the new booster. That's what I'm going to go with. There are other studies that have shown people might get a better response if they wait even a little bit longer, but we don't really know for sure. I think it's pretty safe to consider waiting 3 months. And again, you need to think about other circumstances in your life that might increase your risk and kind of factor those in. Talking with your doctor is a great way to make that decision.
September officially kicks off flu season here in the US. So let's talk about that seasonal flu vaccination. Should people living with MS receive a flu shot every year? And if they should, when is the best time to get it?
Yes, people with MS, really anybody 6 months and older should be getting a flu vaccine every year. Flu causes tremendous problems for our healthcare system and can cause really severe illness and even death on an annual basis. So we really need to be doing everything we can to protect us. Unless there's a specific reason like an allergy, it's really recommended and important for everyone to get that flu vaccine. For most people, the best time to get it is right now. September and October are the best months to make sure you're protected throughout the flu season.
Jada wants to know if the flu nasal spray vaccine is the same as the shot, and is it safe for people with MS?
So the flu nasal vaccine is actually different from the shot. It is one of the few live vaccines that's used in the United States. For people who are on certain disease-modifying medications, it's not recommended to get those live vaccines, as I was talking about earlier. So in those of us who have MS, especially if we're on certain disease-modifying therapies, we need to get the injectable flu shot.
Kenzie tells us that she's 6 months pregnant and she's living with MS. Her doctor has recommended getting the flu vaccine, but Kenzie's worried it's going to cause a relapse. You have any recommendations?
Well, first of all, congratulations, Kenzie. That's exciting. I think what your doctor is recommending sounds like very solid advice. I would usually recommend following your doctor's guidance. Your doctor's going to know best your medical history, your medications, your circumstances. It can help you weigh the risks and benefits. For women who are pregnant, flu is a very particular, more of a concern than for a lot of other folks because it can cause severe illness during pregnancy, and it can also be harmful to a developing baby. So, for example, fever is a common symptom of flu, and that increases the risk of adverse outcomes. Getting vaccinated during pregnancy protects the mom and the baby. It also protects the baby in the first several months after birth as the antibodies from the mom pass on to the developing baby. So I would strongly recommend pregnant women to get vaccinated. If you have special concerns or circumstances, again, talking with your doctor is a good idea.
We heard from Darren, who's wondering if he can get his flu shot and COVID-19 booster at the same time.
Yes, great question. It's a really good idea to do that. That's what we're planning to do for those of us in my family that have not had COVID recently. They'll be getting both of those vaccines at the same time. They're given in different arms, but there are no concerns about administering COVID and flu vaccine concurrently or with other vaccines that you may be behind on.
The shingles vaccine is recommended for adults who are 50 years and older. Is this a 1 or 2 dose vaccine? And is this one that people should get every year?
Great question. There's a fairly new shingles vaccine called Shingrix. So it is something that some people may not have heard of yet. It's actually much more effective than the previous shingles vaccine, which was called Zostavax. The Shingrix vaccine is a 2-dose vaccine. It's usually given 2 to 6 months apart, those 2 doses. It's not only indicated for people age 50 plus, but it's actually indicated for adults who are 19 and older who have a weakened immune system because of a disease-modifying therapy or because of an illness or a medical condition. So MS specialists are increasingly recommending this Shingrix vaccine to any adult who has MS if they're about to start immunosuppressive therapy.
Is there any research? I think you just answered this again. You're a step ahead of me today.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I was going to ask whether there's any research about how that shingles vaccine is going to affect people with MS.
Well, I think it's important to clarify, we don't know for sure how the Shingrix vaccine may be different in people with MS. Like some of the other vaccines, there's at least this thought that it may be not quite as effective. But the good news is the Shingrix vaccine is actually very effective in the general population. It's more than 90% effective at preventing shingles, much better than the previous Zostavax. It also is very effective at preventing post-herpetic neuralgia, which is a terrible complication from shingles that can lead to literally years of disabling pain. Certainly something that we want to avoid. So everybody should be getting that Shingrix vaccine if it's recommended by your doctor. Shingles is a reactivation of the chickenpox virus, and that reactivation is more common as we get older and when our immune system is a little bit weaker or compromised by medications. I think the vaccination really helps protect people from that reactivation during the course of MS treatment. So it's really important for us to get it. It's not expected that the vaccine would have any kind of adverse impact on MS or anybody with MS.
Pneumonia is common among young children, but older adults are the ones who are at greatest risk of serious illness. Dr. Doggett, what's a recommendation for getting the pneumococcal vaccine for people living with MS?
So pneumococcal disease is an infection that's caused by a bacteria called pneumococcus. This pneumococcal vaccine does not just prevent pneumonia, but it prevents infections caused by that type of bacteria. And that can be meningitis, bloodstream infections, even sinus infections. The pneumococcal vaccines help prevent pneumococcal disease and are currently recommended for adults 65 and older. According to the American Academy of Neurology recommendations on people with MS, those pneumococcal vaccines should also be considered for individuals with compromised lung function, including those who use a wheelchair or who are confined to a bed. So it's, again, an important consideration for people with MS, depending on your circumstances and your age.
Well, I know that there are 4 pneumococcal vaccines approved for use in the United States by the FDA. Is there any difference between these 4 vaccines?
Yes, all 4 are a little bit different. The 4 types of pneumococcal vaccines are different based on the number and types of pneumococcal bacteria that they help prevent. So there's, and forgive me for the numbers, but there's PCV 13, 15, and 20, and then there's the PPSV 23. So the PCV 15 and 20 were only recently approved. I think it was last October. And so it's not quite as common for people to know about them. And you don't have to remember the numbers. I think, the bottom line is you want to talk with your doctor about which pneumococcal vaccine makes sense. If people have never received a pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, a PCV vaccine, or they don't know what they may have received in the past, they usually would get a PCV 15 or 20. If they've received the PCV 13 in the past or the 15, then they're supposed to get a follow-up dose of a vaccine, the PPSV 23. Very difficult to remember all of this. So talking with your doctor about that pneumococcal vaccine is a good idea.
Well, you shared some really helpful and very timely information with us today. What would you say are the top 3 takeaways that you'd like our viewers to remember?
Well, thank you so much. I have MS too. So these questions and this information is really personal to me. And I've been disappointed over the last couple of year and a half or so to see people missing out on important vaccines that save lives because of misinformation. I've already got a chronic disease. I want to take advantage of every opportunity to stay healthy. And vaccines are one of the most important. So just real quick, top 3 takeaways, I would say vaccines, particularly the non-live vaccines, are safe for people with MS. We should be receiving those vaccines according to standard vaccine guidelines. And now is a good time to catch up if you missed vaccines during the pandemic. Second, we recommend that people with MS receive their flu shots and the new COVID booster as soon as possible this season. And then third, I would say the timing of vaccination and disease modifying therapy is important, to talk with your doctor about that timing and just making sure that you're really optimizing your chance to get a good response from those vaccines.
Well, thank you for sharing your expertise with us, Dr. Doggett. I think we have time for one more question. Chloe said that she got very sick last year after getting the flu shot, and she wants to know if the flu vaccine can cause someone to get the flu.
Thanks for asking. This is a really common myth. And I think that it's partly because when flu shots come out, it's a time of year where we often see a lot of different cold viruses circulating. But I want to be really clear here, and that is that the flu shot cannot and does not cause the flu. Side effects can mimic flu. So if you get a flu vaccine, you may have a fever, headaches, muscle aches, but those usually resolve in a day or two. It's usually much less severe and much less serious than the flu shot, than getting the flu infection itself. Also, the vaccine can take up to 2 weeks to take effect. So it's possible that someone can get infected with the flu and get sick from it during that 2-week period. And then just like with COVID, we see breakthrough infections with flu vaccine. But getting that flu vaccine reduces your chances of hospitalization and serious outcomes from a flu infection.
Well, I want to thank everyone who submitted questions, and thank you for being with us today, Dr. Doggett.
Sure, it's my pleasure. And I just want to put a shout out to my friend, Dr. Leora Freeman, who's an MS specialist here in Austin and helped me answer a lot of these questions or prepare for this opportunity. So thank you so much.
Before we close, I want to remind you that the National MS Society's MS Navigator Team is your best partner when it comes to connecting you to the very best information and resources on living with MS. You can reach an MS Navigator by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. For information and resources on MS, please visit the Society's website. You'll find research updates and news, information on connection programs like self-help groups and MS Friends. You'll see ways for you to get involved, and you'll hear about upcoming events that are taking place near you. Remember, you can connect with the National MS Society and others affected by MS on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I hope you'll join me every week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where I continue the conversation that we start here. You'll find Real Talk MS at realtalkms.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. I'd like to thank Dr. Doggett for joining us today. Please remember that a recording of this webcast will be available at the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I hope you'll join us at this same time for next week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. You can always find our upcoming program topics on the National MS Society's website. And now I have a favor to ask each of you. Getting your feedback on today's webcast is important. So if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll see a link to a survey pinned to the comments section. And on YouTube, you'll find that link in the program description. Completing the survey makes a real difference. The information you provide helps us continuously improve, and it helps shape future programs. The survey takes just 1 minute, so I hope you'll take a minute to fill it out. On behalf of Dr. Lisa Doggett and the National MS Society, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Please stay safe and make healthy choices.